When an elite track athlete explodes out of the starting blocks, the human body acts as a highly tuned mechanical system. Dozens of muscle groups fire in exact sequence, generating massive force in a fraction of a second. But that same mechanical complexity applies to everyday actions. An elderly person pushing up from a deep armchair relies on a delicate orchestration of joint angles, torque, and muscular activation just to stand up. In movement science, professionals often use the terms anatomy, kinesiology, and biomechanics interchangeably to describe these actions. Treating these words as synonyms is a mistake. They represent distinct disciplines that evaluate the body through entirely different lenses. To accurately analyze human movement, we use a rigid four-tier hierarchy: anatomy, functional anatomy, kinesiology, and biomechanics at the apex. A rigorous analysis builds sequentially from the bottom tier, mapping static structure, up to the apex, measuring the quantitative physics of motion. Applying this strict progression is the only reliable way to evaluate complex joint mechanics or design effective rehabilitation protocols for an injured patient. At the very base of the analytical pyramid lies anatomy. This is the foundational science of the body's physical structure. Pure anatomy is an exercise in static identification. It involves locating bones, tracing nerve innervations, and mapping blood supplies. Looking at this static 3D skeletal model, a purely anatomical focus allows us to pinpoint the prominent bony structure on the medial aspect of the elbow and correctly identify it as the medial epicondyle of the humerus. This tells us exactly where the structure is located. It offers absolutely no information about human action. To understand motion, we step up to the second tier, functional anatomy. This is the necessary transition layer bridging static structure to dynamic action. Rather than asking, where is this muscle located, functional anatomy asks, what movement does this muscle produce? It evaluates the specific body components required to achieve a physical function. We can see this distinction clearly in the shoulder. On a static map, we locate the highlighted deltoid muscle while the arm rests passively. But watch what happens during the actual movement of lifting the arm, a motion called abduction, along with upward rotation of the shoulder girdle. The deltoid cannot execute this motion alone. As the arm lifts, the trapezius, levator scapulae, rhomboid, and supraspinatus all contract simultaneously. Functional anatomy reveals that complex elevation requires precise synergy. Multiple muscle groups must act in concert to generate the motion. By identifying exactly how these groups work together, functional anatomy provides the engine for movement, setting the stage for evaluating actual tasks in motion. Once we understand the engine, we move to the third tier of our pyramid, kinesiology. Kinesiology is the broad umbrella scientific study of human movement. Historically, kinesiological analysis evaluates movement efficiency from an anatomical standpoint. The core feature of this approach is that it is inherently qualitative. A standard assessment involves visually observing a skill, breaking that skill down into discrete phases, and identifying the major muscular contributors to each joint movement, all without using numerical data or instruments. Let's apply this to a clinical case study. Watching this 3D anatomical model of a patient as he begins to rise from a chair, we can perform a qualitative phase breakdown. In phase 1, the hips lift. This hip extension is driven by the hamstrings. Moving into phase 2, the legs straighten. This knee extension is primarily driven by the quadriceps femoris. Finally, in phase 3, the feet push off the floor. This action is plantar flexion, executed by the triceps surae group. This breakdown provides a clear, accurate anatomical map of the action. However, visual observation cannot measure the actual physical strain that joints endure during the lift. Qualitative kinesiology tells us exactly what is moving, but to evaluate injury risk or tissue tolerance in a clinical setting, we need to know exactly how much physical force is involved. That requirement brings us to the apex of the model. Watch the violent impact and extreme deformation of the shoe during this runner's foot strike. Analyzing that impact requires biomechanics, the study of biological systems utilizing the rigorous methods of mechanics and physics. Biomechanics abandons qualitative visual observation. It relies strictly on measurement and numerical evaluation. Applying this lens to the exact same chair rise case study, we view the movement as a technical wireframe, stripping away muscular anatomy to focus strictly on physical mechanics. Rather than just noting the feet push-off, a biomechanical approach measures external forces. These dynamic vectors represent the exact ground reaction forces between foot and floor, scaling as pressure changes. We also measure internal forces. Data streams track specific joint forces at the hip, knee, and ankle in real time as the figure stands. Finally, instrumentation captures precise velocity, tracking exactly how fast the center of mass moves every millisecond. Gathering these precise magnitudes of force and speed allows us to determine the optimal body positions required for the most efficient and effective motion. By converting motion into hard data, biomechanics provides the definitive, quantifiable measurements necessary to understand the mechanical reality of human movement. Looking back at our analytical pyramid, the relationship between these disciplines becomes clear. Anatomy identifies the raw materials, providing a foundational, static map of the body's structure. Functional anatomy takes those raw materials and maps the dynamic engine of synergistic muscles. Kinesiology utilizes those lower tiers to map the discrete phases of movement through visual observation. Biomechanics caps the pyramid by quantifying the exact physical forces acting upon that movement. Attempting to analyze human movement by relying on only one of these lenses leads to an incomplete and potentially dangerous clinical picture. You cannot correct a mechanical joint failure if you only know the names of the bones. Bridging the qualitative visual observations of kinesiology with the quantitative mathematical measurements of physics is the absolute requirement for a comprehensive understanding of how and why the human body moves.